The following podcast is sponsored by Structure Tech.
We want to start today's episode by digging into basically the top 10 areas where Vickie tends to find the most mold. Welcome everyone. You're listening to Structure Talk, a Structure Tech presentation. My name is Bill Ulrich alongside Tessa Murray and Reuben Saltzman. As always, your three-legged stool coming to you from the Northland, talking all things houses, home inspections, and anything else that's rattling around in our head. Welcome to today's episode, which is part 2 of our mold conversation. And back with us again today is Neil Saltzman, the inspection services mold guy, one of the people on our team, our new team who's working with mold. And of course, Vickie Swenson, who's here from Minnesota Mold Inspections. Vickie is the godmother of mold in the state of Minnesota. Let's just be honest. I mean, you set the standard, you write the rules, you write. It's true. It's true. You brought the vast majority of organization to this area, at least in our area. Would you agree to that?
Well, I'll just say I've been doing it for a long time, so I appreciate those kind words.
Yeah, you're very modest. You're very modest. But what we're going to do today is we started last time talking about mold, and Vickie brought to us 57 different places where she finds mold in houses. And we began to deconstruct this list. And like what tends to happen when we get together is we got completely off track and we started talking about this and that. It was still about mold, but today we're going to take a more focused approach. We want to start today's episode by digging into basically the top 10 areas where Vickie tends to find the most mold. So Vickie, can you go ahead and just kind of run through your list? And then I want to touch on something that you brought up briefly in our sort of pre-podcast conversation.
So like I said, when I made the list of the 57 or 59 places that mold hides, they weren't in any real order. So I thought we might start this by I spent some time kind of putting them in order about what I find to be the top 10. So, and I've said this more than once, I think I said it in the original podcast, basement carpet is the number one source. Mm-hmm. Rim joist insulation and unfinished basements, the top of the wall, the rim joists, the insulation and the rim joists is probably number 2. Air exchanger intake ducts, attics, cement walls and basements, leaks under sinks, dirt crawl spaces, insulation in newer homes that have unfinished walls that are above grade. You usually see the insulation behind the plastic, in-slab ductwork, and mini splits in window air conditioners. I think that's a pretty good list of the top 10 places.
Okay, and what is unique about this list, something that you've kind of observed over the years, but was confirmed when you went back and really began to look at this? You mentioned this before, and I want in your own words what you said.
That when I look at, I've always felt like there is more mold caused by condensation than actual leaking. And when I made the list, it did confirm that really the only one of those places where leaks are responsible for the large majority is under sinks. All the other 9 areas where mold grows is basically a condensation or humidity problem.
And when you're saying leak, you mean a plumbing leak?
Yeah, bulk water.
Bulk water.
And when you're talking basement carpeting, is that from seepage or leakage from Mother Earth into the wonderful finished area of your basement?
Yes and no. So basement carpet, even when people call, basement carpet will be about the 4th question I ask. So you start to figure it out by lifting the carpet and looking at the tack strips. Most carpet is going to have a pad and tack strips like you would in an upper level. So it's usually worse in the corners and it's easier to lift in the corners. So I'll usually start in the corner or maybe under an egress window or a window. So when you lift the carpet, if you see rust on the nails, that's usually just condensation. If you lift the carpet and the tack strips have disintegrated or they're super black, you've had a leak there. So the older homes don't have vapor barriers under the cement. And I think some people think cement is waterproof, but it's not. So the main source of moisture is vapor that just comes up through your slab. And then also because basements are a hole in the ground, a lot of people don't control their humidity. So you have 2 sources, the hydrostatic pressure vapor and the humidity. And that is enough to grow mold, even if you don't have a leak. Mm-hmm. And that's because the mold food in carpet is dust. Most carpet is synthetic. and they have put brand new carpet in a humid chamber, it won't grow mold. It grows on the dust, and there's no way you can vacuum out all the dust. So if you have, the older the carpet, the higher the risk. If it's 20 years old and you haven't controlled your humidity, I can almost guarantee that you're going to have mold.
I got to chime in because it reminds me of fiberglass insulation. I can't remember who recently put a paper out there talking about how it doesn't matter what fiberglass manufacturers say. I mean, they'll say, oh, it won't support mold growth. It's like, it doesn't matter what you say. Sure, mold won't literally grow on the fiberglass fibers in a hyperbaric chamber or whatever you just said, Vickie. But there's going to be dust in there and it's going to grow on that.
So that's true when you see mold on carpet, on cement walls, or insulation. It's all growing on the dust. And there's a lot of dust that gets in these places. So that's exactly right.
You think sometimes you've seen inside of ductwork. There's literally so much dust that's accumulated over years and years and years. If somebody comes out and kind of vacuums out your ductwork and you see what's coming out of there, it's unbelievable how much is there. I can't imagine under the right circumstances, bad an HVAC system could actually be in terms of mold.
And so you want to jump right to HVAC now? Because carpet is, we kind of could, that's a big deal with carpet. It's going to come now, like I said, I went to an arbitration once where the tack strips had disappeared. And the woman said, nope, never leaked. Well, clearly it's leaked. The mold has eaten your tack strips away. So I don't know if people just don't notice it or they're afraid to admit it in arbitration, but most of the time it's humidity, but you can tell when it's leaking. So I think that's the main thing about carpet is people say, so should I have it down there? I consider ceramic tile the best flooring for basements. I consider laminate the worst. Some people use an indoor-outdoor carpet with no tack strips, no pad. I don't know what kind of chemicals they put in it to prevent mold, but that is an option. As long as you keep it really dry with a dehumidifier, as bad as carpet molds, you still can have it if you're super careful.
So you said you consider laminate the worst for a basement.
There are some people that think laminate is a good idea in basements, but the thing with laminate, it's waterproof. If you had laminate in your kitchen and your dishwasher sprung a leak, the restoration companies would have to remove the laminate to dry the subfloor. So when you put laminate on your basement or that dry core stuff, because people put these dry core panels under their carpet, it really just traps any moisture that's coming up from your slab. And if you do get a leak, it's really trapped. So a lot of laminate in basements is going to grow mold on the bottom side.
All right.
And I've heard some building scientists, talk about that. And there are those systems, dry core, whatever you mentioned before, where, they are designed to basically, yes, trap moisture. But as long as they're installed so that there's no communication from that airspace under that flooring into the airspace in the room, then in theory, the building scientists say, like, that's okay, I guess. The mold will grow there. It just won't come up into the air that you breathe. You just have to make sure that it gets installed perfectly and it stays 100% sealed, how is that possible?
You are correct. If you have sandy soil, you're on a hill, you have good gutters and everything's perfect. But I had an arbitration a year ago. It was flooding so much, the water was coming up through the cracks, the seams in the dry core, and just molded the OSB. So I'm just still not a fan of it.
I'm with you on that. Yeah, the idea of having some sort of substance that is a vapor barrier and having a gap between that and the concrete floor, you are going to get mold growing in there somehow, one way or another.
Yep. I think the people with sandy soil are a little better off. I don't know what you guys find in that area, but the Great Sand Basin of Coon Rapids, they have some pretty nice basements over there.
Yeah.
Agreed.
We don't in the city.
Plymouth, there's so much clay around and that just contributes to problems.
No kidding. That's for sure. I'm starting to think that Vickie and Pat would have a lot of similar opinions about basements.
Pat Hellman.
Yes.
Yep.
In them, except store things like mechanical equipment.
Dehumidify them, and yes.
For me, when I do a mold inspection, I see an unfinished basement. It's like my job's half done because you're not wondering what's under that carpet, what's under that dry core, what's behind that. It's just so easy to diagnose where the mold is, but it still happens.
Yeah.
In the rim joist or some old shelving or on your cement walls, but it's just much easier to handle.
Yeah, easier to clean up too.
So we talked about sources of mold in the basement carpet. We got maybe two areas it could be: bulk water from the exterior with negative grade, disconnected downspouts, or maybe a water event that happened. A water heater broke, leaked, flooded the basement, or something similar that It's allowing that mold to grow in the carpet. That's what I see, those two main
Exactly.
sources. Okay.
And when people try to dry it themselves with a box fan and a shop vac, it's going to grow mold.
What should happen if you have a leak event and your carpet gets wet? What should be done? Is there a way that can be dried out without having to replace the carpet?
If it's really new carpet and hasn't collected a lot of dust and you hire a good restoration company and they get it dried in time, that's the way you can save it. But I've even had insurance companies have me test afterwards to see if it worked. And sometimes that will work if it's new and you hire a good drying company.
Define new.
6 months.
Okay.
Oh my,
Okay.
that's really
And
new.
how quickly would that carpet need to be dried out, do you think, for it to be okay?
Well, a drying company can dry anything within 72 hours. So
Okay.
because mold can grow in 24 to 48 hours, but they pretty much guarantee that they'll dry your structure in 72 hours. They'll
Okay.
take out the pad. The pad always goes. I'm not sure about the pad. I think I talked about this later, but someone told me that there are a lot of pads are made out of recycled car seats. And I did read about pads. It's all recycled foam. So how many germs and mold spores come in that pad? So when your basement floods, they don't even try to save the pad.
Well, then saving the carpet is you got to peel it all back, roll it up, put it to the side, then take all that pad out. There's a lot of work. I mean, if labor means anything, so.
That's why I
Quite the
really
process.
like the polished concrete in basements. That's another option that is really nice.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
don't know how you guys feel about epoxy in basements. Do you like the epoxy basement floors?
I've never seen that done.
Oh,
I mean, it sounds wonderful,
Yeah.
provided
Yeah.
you have sub-slab heat. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
you got a bunch of hot water pipes running underneath your slab, then I'm all for it. But otherwise, it's like, that is darn cold.
Yeah.
That's like unusable.
You're just talking about comfort wise, walking on just a concrete slab on your
Yeah.
socks is uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
you want some sort of in-floor heat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
Totally agreed.
How much do you know about hydrostatic pressure, Vickie, and pushing this moisture over under, below the basement floor? And if you epoxy a basement floor, that's basically adding a vapor barrier at that point, right?
Mhm.
So that's a question I can't answer. I know it's there. I don't know if it's stronger in some houses. I don't know if it's affected by stack effect. That is an area.
Mhm.
I don't know.
I can't answer that question either, but I was just, I would think epoxy would definitely reduce like the vapor permeability of concrete for sure. But as long as that concrete doesn't have some sort of vapor barrier on the other side, it could dry back to the soil potentially, or at least moisture can move through it in one way, in theory.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not qualified to answer that question.
Yep, me neither. But when I talk about new houses being full of formaldehyde and OSB and spray foam and everything, the EPA Indoor Air Plus program that is now here because new houses have so much formaldehyde and burn down quickly. The one thing I do like about the new houses are the basements. I do think the basements are better. They're poured, they're insulated and waterproof better on the outside. So as much as I'm cautious about the new houses, I do like their basements better.
Yeah, can we take the framing from like grade up on a 1950s house and like take the basement from a 2010 house?
Again, this EPA Indoor Air Plus, apparently the Department of Energy has declared that a lot of new homes in America are toxic. And so there's a program that some builders can follow to avoid some of these formaldehyde problems. I have somebody looking into that right now.
How do you end up with a formaldehyde problem in a brand new house when in theory you've got agencies out there that are testing this material to make sure it's safe? How do you end up creating a problem?
I am not sure. I know that, so my house is 18 years old. I have OSB joists. I have plywood subfloor, build right sheething. I have tar paper instead of Tyvek, and I have James Hardy siding. I have really good air quality. But
Seems like we shouldn't be building toxic environments because these materials should have gone through a lab. They should have been tested. Are they safe? When you mix them with this and that, all in this enclosure that's wrapped in plastic, you think somebody much smarter than me would actually have figured out that, yeah, we're okay. We're okay. All we have to do is exchange this air every now and then. And even if you don't, you're still not going to get hurt.
yeah. So what I was going to say is I was working for a firefighter once because I've never trusted my OSB joists. And this was probably 5 years ago. And he told me if a new house has OSB joists and the fire starts in the basement, we just let the house collapse into the basement because they're going to burn so fast. So my understanding is that Weyerhaeuser tried to combat this with putting extra flame retardant on their joists, and it backfired to where they created more formaldehyde and had a big problem with that. So it's my understanding now that in a new house, if they're using OSB joists and they're not going to finish the basement, you'll see sheetrock on the ceiling to delay the burn in case it starts in the basement. So I don't know. I agree. This formaldehyde, it doesn't make sense to me, but it's very real.
Yeah, those are both options. I mean, the stuff that Weyerhaeuser had, they call it flak jacket. And to the best of my knowledge, it's still available today. They just reformulated it, and it doesn't off gas all of this formaldehyde anymore. There was a big class action lawsuit against them. But at the same time, the building code, what the building code had actually prescribed was that you cover the whole bottom of your joist with drywall. That's what the building code said. And it said, or you could have some type of equivalent. And that flak jacket was the equivalent level of protection. So we got a few options there. We're getting totally down a rabbit hole.
Like rabbit. I mean, this is what we do. This is why we got like 6 last time.
Yeah.
All right, Vickie, we talked about basement carpet. We touched on rim joist last time, pretty much in pretty good detail. Air exchange intakes, why is that a thing?
So an air exchanger is basically here because once we built the houses tighter, they're not breathing like the old houses. So I tell people all it is a mechanical ventilator. It brings in fresh air, routes it through your furnace, and sends it back out. And I'm not an HVAC expert. I am a home inspector, so I can't even really talk about difference between HRV and ERV, but this is what I know. That air exchanger is pulling so much air in, and that people that run them in the summer are pulling in dust and humidity and mold spores right into their air exchanger. And so most of them are made with flex duct that's insulated. And I don't believe it's really hard to clean flex duct. So I open up the air exchanger, I put my hand up into that intake duct, I swab it, and I know that almost every single one of them is full of mold. So I've actually been thinking about proposing a code change because some people have a really nice situation. If your air exchanger is in a utility room and your intake duct's about 4 or 5 feet long, just replace it every 3 or 4 years because it is going to grow mold. If your vent is on the other side of the house and you've got a 30-foot run and you've got a ceiling under that, these people are just having to live with mold in their intake duct because there's really no way to clean it. So I think it should be a metal duct and insulated on the outside because I do believe in the ability to clean metal ducts.
Well, you're not coming to my house to test my duct because as long as I don't know about it, I'm fine.
Yeah, it's one of those unavoidable sources.
I've inspected a few houses where the flex duct has some sag in it, and there's actually standing water in that. Have you guys come across that standing water?
No.
In the intake? And the only thing I can think of is just if that's running in the summer, pulling in hot, humid air, and it's in the basement where it's cool and the house is air conditioned.
Well, sure. What else is going to happen?
Condensation, of course. And then it just sits in that duct. And since it's flex, if it's not fully supported, it'll just start to drip down the lowest point and sag.
Yep.
Just like flex bath fan ducts and attics, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So they can get real nasty.
Well, Tessa, you're asking me if I've ever seen it. I mean, my answer is I've never seen it, but I probably just haven't known enough to look for it.
Well, after I found the one, then I started testing by kind of like lifting up the flex duct intake on a few more.
It's a big challenge. I don't know what's the future is. I've heard some talk about putting HEPA filters. It's just right now one of those unavoidable mold sources. So
how much does the filters on the air exchanger and the filters in your furnace like remove the mold spores from the air if it's coming through an HRV? Like if you have those filters in place and they're pretty clean and you maintain them, are you still going to get a lot of mold blowing through your furnace and you're being distributed throughout the house because of that?
Let's ask Neil that. What do you think, Neil?
I think you would.
Really? Okay.
As opposed to just
unsettling.
opening your window and allowing natural air into your house, like what would be the difference?
Blowing over it and then, being distributed by your furnace throughout the rest of the house. Yeah.
I think some of them are going to get pulled out eventually. Some are going to settle on your carpet. If you do your own mold remediation, you don't run an air scrubber, you're going to have a lot of spores. Eventually, they're going to dissipate, mostly like by settling out. But these spores are tiny. And so all along, people have always wondered, like, is the mold going to get sucked into your furnace? And I always thought that was a bit over exaggerated. But recently with testing, I just had a basement with a lot of stachybotrys in the basement. And I captured it in almost every room on the upper level. And I did one where the mold was in the crawl space and I swabbed the vent and had that mold on the vent. So with more testing, I am starting to think that, yes, it does get pulled into your HVAC system.
Wow.
And can spread around that way. In addition, just a stack effect. I mean, my understanding is 40% of the air in your house is coming up from your basement. So people say, well, I don't go down my basement, the mold is down there, but it can definitely just rise up to the upper levels.
You mentioned something called an air scrubber. What are you talking about?
Yeah. So when you do mold remediation, I'll make this short. You make every attempt to get rid of the mold, and it depends if it's growing on a surface that's porous, non-porous, or semi-porous. That dictates whether you could have to get rid of it or can clean it. Most of the things we deal with, porous would be like carpet, fiberglass insulation, or fabric. You have to get rid of that. If it's on wood, concrete, you sand and scrape it off. Use abrasive methods to get it off. So you're not just spraying and killing it, you're trying to get it out. But the two critical components of a mold remediation is to run a big HEPA air cleaner called an air scrubber, and that removes mold spores to a normal level. You'll never get to zero. But then you use a HEPA vacuum, and all HEPA means is tighter filter traps smaller particles. So the HEPA air cleaner is going to get your mold spores back to a normal level. But then you take a HEPA vacuum and you vacuum every inch of that house, every vertical and horizontal surface, and then you wipe it and you vacuum it again. So when you do mold remediation, you take up, because this is one of my stories about carpet that I will bring in. There was a family that bought a townhouse in Wisconsin, and they sensed that there was a lot of cat urine in the carpet. So they got some sort of light and they could see cat urine everywhere. Well, that's a moisture source. So all they did was pull up the carpet, put down new carpet. They didn't do the air scrubbing and the vacuuming. And it was like 9 months later, these spores were still there, and like really high level spores. So it's not enough to take out your carpet. You have to do something with the air. An alternative is put a fan in the window and suck the air out of the room. Create your own air purifier with a box fan and a HEPA furnace filter. There are a bunch of videos online that show how to do that. Or rent or get your hands on one of these big air scrubbers. But you have to do something with the air when you remove mold. Otherwise, the spores just linger for months.
That was my next question is there just a way to scrub our air on a continuous basis in our homes so we can try to keep mold under control?
Yep. Well, mold under control is really controlling your moisture. But yeah, there are a lot of people that have allergies. I do believe in single room air purifiers. In fact, I sell a certain brand that I really believe in. I think Austin Air is great. I only believe in HEPA and charcoal filtration. Very passionate about air purifiers because most people that call me are caring about their air. So I always say, what kind of air purifier are you running? Because I'm not fond of the ones with UV lights, electrostatic plates, or ionizers, because that technology can put ozone into the air. So here you're running an air purifier to clean your air and you're putting ozone in, which is killing your plants and giving you breathing problems. But a good HEPA and charcoal air purifier that just takes particulates and chemicals out of the air and puts out clean air is, and a lot of people run these, they'll have them in their bedroom, their great room. So I do believe that, yes, air purifiers of the right kind can better air.
I believe in that as well. And I have one running in my family room. Yep.
You run it 24/7 or is
Yep.
it run?
Yep. 24/7. You just replace the filters every year and you wash the other ones or replace those as well. Yeah. It's pretty simple. Just plug and go.
And
What kind of cost are you looking at for something like that?
Couple hundred.
Oh, so it's a low entry point or low barrier to entry.
Yep,
Would you
it
agree,
depends.
Vickie?
Yep. So I trust, I don't know if I don't want to say product names on here, so this may be cut out, but just for you guys, I trust Blue Air, IQ Air, Austin Air, Honeywell, and Air Doctor. Those are 5 that I trust. Austin Air, the filter itself weighs 30 pounds. So the filters last for 3 to 5 years.
Oh.
Yeah, I do believe that air purifiers are a benefit.
How do you spell Austin Air?
AUSTINAIR.com.
Okay, all right. Yeah, we're not going to cut this out.
So I was going to tell you something about the California Air Resource Board. It's a organization in California that tests everything. So you might remember a company called Sharper Image, made really cool things. Well, they're not so much around anymore because their ionic freeze air purifier apparently caused so many ozone problems for people that they went out of business. So there's a website called the California Air Resource Board. They test every air purifier, and if it emits too much ozone, you can't even sell it in California. So if you're online ordering an air purifier and it says can't ship to California, don't buy that because it's going to put ozone in the air. So when I go to that list, they have a list of banned and approved. I'm amazed at how many air purifiers are out there that I've never heard of. It's a very long list.
Well, you want to talk about the Wild West. When COVID popped up, there was all these conversations happening about how do we clean up houses and how do we kill this virus, and ozone was something that we talked about. I've heard a lot of home inspectors talking about, well, could we start up a business where we would go in and kind of try to help clean these places. And I don't know anything about ozone, so I'm completely out of my league talking about this, but it just sounded like there was a problem. We were looking for solutions really fast, and I don't know if the use of ozone was warranted or a good idea or not, but it sounds like.
So when it comes to mold, ozone's not going to help your mold because we're trying to remove it, not kill it. It could kill your mold. Ozone is an amazing deodorizer. It is chemically releases or destroys odors. So if you had a house fire and your whole house smelled like smoke, they would bring in ozone because it doesn't cover up odors, it destroys them. So there is a use for it. So the three, like if you go into a house and they have a lot of cat smells or cigarette smell, these are the three deodorization techniques: ozone, hydroxyl generators, or chlorine dioxide fogging. So ozone does have a place. They'll use them in hotel rooms for 8 hours a night. They'll use them in gyms. They have an amazing ability to clean the air, but you can't breathe it in. And if you run it too long, it's oxidation. It'll start like ruining your rubber gaskets on your refrigerator. So you have to be very careful. So I do believe in ozone as a tool for deodorizing in unoccupied spaces for the right amount of time.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
Let's move down the list here. Dirt floors and crawl spaces. I know that's Tessa disapproves of, but
why do we even have them? Why do people even build like that?
Money. That's why, because
Yeah.
it's less expensive than pouring concrete.
So Neil, what do you think about the dirt crawl spaces?
Yeah, very moldy areas. Found tons of mold in those spaces. Pretty nasty, pretty stinky. Yep. Not good.
Yeah. The worst is when they have the fiberglass insulation in there. So I did one in Inver Grove Heights, and we brought in the city building inspector, because when you see the insulation under the floor joist and then some plastic under that and the dirt, that moisture gets up there, it traps. I mean, she had 60,000 spores in that crawl space. And when I asked the inspector, because it had a wood foundation, when I see wood foundations, I always try to go to because I didn't know if we could put Celotex on a wood foundation. So I said, let's have the city here and tell us if this is a good idea. And I said, when was it code to put fiberglass under the joist? And he said it never was, but I think it seems intuitive to some people. Like, let's just put all this fiberglass under the floor, it'll keep it warm. Those are really nasty.
Mhm.
So I do believe you can clean them. You have to get out all the fiberglass. Sheetrock should never be down there. You see that once in a while. And I think that might have been down there for a fire barrier if they had foam. But my favorite way to do a crawl space is get everything out, then use the Celotex, or some brand of foil-lined foam at the perimeter, nothing under the floor, and then like a 12 to 20 mil plastic vapor barrier, overlap 5 feet, taped, brought up to the edges. You can get those under control, but it's expensive. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that after 20 years, you might have to do it again because dust will land in there and you can grow a thin layer of mold. They will degrade over time, but about every 20 years, you need to do that. And you can make them really nice.
If done the correct way, they're beautiful. I've
Yep.
seen some very nice crawl spaces.
Well, and then there's also a company, there was one house that I worked in on a lake in Chanhassen. The whole house was 3 different crawl spaces. Well, one of the crawl spaces, the dirt was almost up to the floor. So the first thing they had to do was use 5-gallon buckets to make the floor level.
Yikes.
This was a $28,000 crawl space project, but I went back a year later and it was performing so well because he put a dehumidifier hanging from the ceiling and had air blowing through. It's like, so you can fix them, but it's just not cheap.
One area I'd like to talk about is underfloor ducts.
Underfloor in this crawl space, or like?
No. Well, going past crawl spaces now. HVAC underfloor ductwork, transite ducts. That's a nasty area.
Where are you seeing this type of ductwork?
What do we got for years? 70s, 90s, somewhere in there?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And when you say transite, you're talking about sub-slab ductwork.
Thank you. Sub-slab ductwork.
Yep. Yeah, and transite, we always like to reserve that term for when it truly contains asbestos in the ductwork.
Got it.
But
Yep.
most of
Yep.
the stuff is going to be PVC. I think that's
Correct.
my share of what we see for sub-slab ductwork, right?
Correct.
Yep, and then they do some sheet metal in between, like you'll see a house with sheet metal, which is totally rotted.
Putting this metal like right in contact with dirt, how else could this possibly end up?
Well, there was a worse material. Wasn't there like a cardboard?
I
Yes.
saw that. Yeah, what was that? I've only seen that once.
About it, Reuben. We should link to it. But
I do.
yeah. On a very rare occasion, you might run into something that's not metal and not asbestos and not plastic.
Yeah, you guys talk amongst yourselves. I'll figure it out.
Thank you.
Well, Neil, I wanted to ask, if you test sub-slab ductwork, is it coming back high levels almost always, or have you ever seen a clean?
Almost always, Bill. Take a swab of that, really high spore counts, right, Vickie?
Totally agree. And that again, I think is mostly from condensation. It's the dust. So I don't know if PVC is more prone to mold. We have a lake place that we use these PVC rollers to help put the dock in, and they sat outside for a year, and I see mold growing on those. So one thing I kind of figured out, like maybe is PVC prone to mold growth, but it's the dust and then the condensation. But these sub-slab ducts, I've seen, one of my clients almost died because she lived near a lake and standing water was in there. And a bacteria grew that went through her furnace and into her lungs, and it went septic infection. She literally almost died from them. Now that's rare. I had one a couple years ago in the middle of winter. She said, I have a bad smell coming out, and I thought it was a dead mouse. So there's a plumber that I like that uses a sewer scope, and he can inspect the whole series. He found dead and hibernating snakes.
Yeah.
And then his camera woke up the snakes, so now the snakes are coming out. I had a client who had them in a really nice townhouse, because you'll see them a lot in townhouses next to a wetland. And she had live snakes coming up the whole time she lived there. But the homeowners association said, don't clean your ducts because you'll get more cracks and more snakes. It's like, I couldn't live there. So those are rare problems where you get standing water and snakes, but it happens. And so I agree. Most of the time, you're just going to see a thin layer of gray mold that, you're right, if you swab it, it's full of mold. So I just think you have to clean those. It's really expensive to abandon them. That's an option, but clean them every 3 years. And it's one of those things that seem like a good idea, but isn't.
Clean it. How?
So most duct cleaning is done with brushes and air. And this was probably 10 years ago. My client said, well, I just had them clean. I'm like, well, I can still scrape the mold out with my fingernail. So I searched and searched to find, as everybody I knew, like who can really clean them. And I was using a guy for a while, but someone said, well, he worked his buns off, but I can still see mold in there. So I was on a job one day and I thought, who clean these because they're spotless? And it turned out to be someone I know really well. I call it wet and scrubby, wet and abrasive. He actually puts a liquid down there and then puts a rag on his brush and just scrubs it. So it's a wet abrasive. And I know some duct cleaners are like, well, you shouldn't put moisture in your ducts, but the way he does it, he gets them really clean.
That sounds expensive.
Yes.
I think it starts at 500. But what are you going to do? These things it's amazing, because I was just in a house up in Albertville and super moldy, but people just don't look in there, just don't think of it. They're just living with this mold problem that just doesn't, like most problems. I think, I started out last year, I think everybody thinks mold is going to be on your sheetrock. They don't know it's in your ducts, in your attic, that's why we find so much mold that people are living with. But it's amazing that people don't realize that these sub-slab ducts are a problem.
I agree. That's the first place I like to go when I see a house that's got sub-slab ducts. Go to that basement, take a look, pull that cover, and typically it's going to be moldy, and that's a problem because you're breathing that air.
Yep. So how do you advise people? Do you steer them away from that house, or just say you have to get it cleaned, or you should get it inspected? What's your advice?
I give them options. Yeah, for sure. You can try cleaning it, then have it retested. I think your guy sounds like a great guy for doing the mitigation. It's either that or they've had to go overhead, abandon it and go overhead. And it's very expensive, probably minimum of 20,000 that way.
Yep.
But I will say, from a home inspection perspective, one thing we always try to shy away from, I shouldn't say shy away, one thing we never do is tell somebody either buy this house or don't buy this house.
Correct.
Yeah.
We will just give them the options, and they got to make those decisions for themselves.
Right.
Totally agree.
I'm surprised that at the code level, there's not conversations about creating bad environments inside of new builds. Like, it feels like this should be addressed at the code level, and they should just say, you shouldn't do that anymore. It's not a good idea.
Well, we really don't see it anymore, Bill.
And I agree. But my dad's house burned down, and he had a rental house on Lake Minnetonka for a while, and they had that in a 3-year-old house. So because it was right next to the lake, I don't know. So you will still see it once in a while in a new house.
Slab on grade houses, townhomes and stuff have it, and that's always one big concern when you're inspecting.
What's the best way to heat and cool a slab on grade, do you think?
In-floor heat.
The in-floor heat is absolutely the best way to heat anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure.
And then I got the answer to our quiz. What's the cardboard tubing that they used? It's sonotube.
Yeah, sonotube.
Yeah, it's the same stuff they use for footings, to pour concrete footings.
Oh my gosh.
Cardboard tube, high grade cardboard. And they used it for sub-slab ductwork, amazingly. And you can imagine what happens to it. It disintegrates.
Oh man.
Vickie, I don't want to start a fight here between you and Tessa, but when we were talking about the best way to heat, we say in floor, right? But the best way to cool is from the top down. Like ducts in the attic. That's going to make Tessa's blood boil. So just warning.
I kind of agree. So Tessa, why don't you like ducts in the attic? I had a guy who was so afraid of mold. He built on slab. He put everything up in the attic. This was up in sandstone. Well, and they used all flex duct. And he was growing mold through his air exchanger already. I said, well, just replace it with metal duct. He goes, oh no, they entombed it in spray foam. All this flex duct. I'm like, is that even, I don't know. He moved to California, sold that house. But what are the issues with flex duct in attics?
Well, anytime you run ductwork outside of like the thermal boundary of the house, like outside the insulation and everything, then you're taking that conditioned air, like in the summertime, if you've got cold air going through that ductwork and it's in a hot attic, then you're more likely to have condensation form on the duct itself. And then you get all the issues with condensation and moisture, not to mention the energy efficiency problems with that too, just losing cooling. And wintertime, the opposite problem, you're losing heat into the attic space and you can create ice dam issues. And if you've got leaky ductwork, then you're pumping warm, moist air into the attic too, which can create problems, in and of itself. So just running ductwork through an unconditioned space like that just increases the potential for condensation and energy efficiency problems and building performance issues. So, I always prefer to see ductwork inside the conditioned space, not in the slab, not in the attic, not in a tuck under garage ceiling, but like in the house.
Yeah, that's where it belongs.
Yeah.
And one we kind of skipped over was attics. We find a lot of mold problems in attics. And Pops, you just shared a photo with me, I think this morning, of an attic you were looking at. What do we usually see with attics?
The bath fan duct was not insulated and it was not hooked up to the outside. So it was pumping all kinds of warm, moist air into that attic, condensing on the bottom of the roof sheathing, delaminating the roof sheathing, and all kinds of moisture issues. Not good.
And is that something they thought was a good idea for a while, or is that unintentional?
This is unintentional.
The roofers came by, knocked the duct down. Now it's pouring in. Yeah, hey, you don't mean to throw roofers under the bus. I'm not trying to do that.
Yeah.
That's what happens though. Or they forget to put the duct or the vents on the ceiling, the roof.
Well, and I know that there's been a lot of homes built around like the 70s and 80s where you would have a first floor bathroom. It was just a powder room. You'd have a sink and a toilet. Mm-hmm. And they would build them without running a duct to the outside. They just run that duct up into the attic space thinking, well, there's no shower. It's not a big deal. And somehow these all passed inspection. They're all just built that way. And it doesn't matter if you don't have a shower in there, that's taking warm, humid air and you're pumping it into an attic. So for a while, we got by with doing it. Yeah. And it's never been a good idea.
One more thing while we're on HVAC, I want to talk about these round, because a lot of people are using flex duct. You'll see like some of the newer homes have the round supply vent cover instead of the old rectangular vent cover. So a few years back, I went into a house. You'll sometimes see mold growing right around that vent cover. And this guy had every single one. And I'm like, I didn't know what was happening at that time. So I researched. I found on the internet, they said sometimes it's like if the duct isn't connected to the vent, that's going to happen. I think this is what's really happening, because I saw one where this was happening and there was no duct feeding the vent. They were using a sheetrock cavity as the duct. So there was no duct, flex duct. So I think what's happening is those round ducts, for one thing, they have a foam. If you pull them down, there's like a little layer of foam. So I think when condensation happens there, that foam traps the condensation. So that's when I was trying to piece this all together. That's what one of the remediators told me. Well, the foam in there creates some moisture and that spreads to the sheetrock. I think what's really happening is gravity pulls those down and the cold air is escaping above the vent cover. and condensation's happening there. So I think it looks worse than it is, but so you'll see some that are screwed to the ceiling, but these ones that are just sort of up there and they're not secured very well, I really think that's what's happening. And during air conditioning, that cold air is, the gravity's pulling the vent cover down, the cold air goes out above and causes condensation there. So it looks worse than it is. I don't think it's like anything wrong with your HVAC. I just think that vent cover is not securely attached to the ceiling.
Easy fix.
Yeah, so when the guy had them on, everyone was like, I have no idea. It looked really scary, but I don't think it really is that big of a deal.
What you're saying is periodically look at these vent covers and make sure there's no obvious signs of mold growth or anything like that going on.
Yep, because we don't really see them so much. You don't see that problem with the old metal vent covers. Occasionally I'll see mold on a HVAC supply. And so one thing that can cause that is if your air conditioner is oversized. So your air conditioner cools it and quits running, but isn't running long enough to really take out the humidity. So I think some people think, oh, bigger is better. But if your part of it is to remove humidity. So if your air conditioner is shutting down before the humidity is gone, I think that's when you will see some mold on the vent covers.
Speaking of air conditioners, I think the last of the top 10 that we haven't touched on quite yet are window unit air conditioners and also mini splits. So that made your top 10. What are you seeing on these units?
Well, I had a landlord, they'd already taken the cover off and you can just see the mold because they're condensing in there and they're moving air with dust. So when I did some research on, you can clean these things. So I tell people go online, find a YouTube video, look up your model that you really should clean these. The interesting thing about the mini splits is to hire a guy to clean it, it's $400 or $450. And when you read online about cleaning mini splits, they said you should do it every 4 months. So it's just another one of those unavoidable mold sources that I think mini splits seem like a good idea, but
you're crushing my world because I there are some situations I think mini splits solve a lot of issues in an affordable way. If you've got an old house that doesn't have ductwork and you want some sort of air conditioning or something, but is there a way for a homeowner to like clean it out properly so you don't have to spend $400 hiring someone? Is it as simple as like cleaning off the filters and washing and putting back, or do you really need to dig in there? And
I think you really need to dig in there. That's what I'm going to do more research on it. But when I saw it and looked it up, because he said he couldn't find anyone to clean it.
I wonder what they do. I'm just curious what the cleaning process is for something like that.
I think it's just cleaning every little fin, wiping everything off.
What they do is crush your soul.
I agree. They seem so convenient, but you can also get mold in your A-coil and your traditional air conditioner. And so I'm curious to hear what you guys say about this, because originally I can't open the furnace. So when I have wanted to check someone's A-coil, I say arrange for an HVAC guy to open it up and then I'll come there and look at it. But one of my clients actually had mold growing in his lungs and he's pretty sure it came from his A-coil. So his furnace guy had a little camera and he showed me, so the A-coil, it's called that because it's shaped like an A. It's cold fins that condense your water into a drain pan, but the dust is moving up through that A. So the mold is in the A-coil and it's really hard to look in there and clean in there. So even when I've had the HVAC guy open it up, you can't really look inside the A-coil without a camera. And I don't think it's, happens in every case, but it depends how much dust is. We're talking about how much dust in the HVAC. It probably I don't know under what conditions that happens, but it's really hard to look under that A-coil. So what do you think about that?
You know of any good way to clean those, Pops?
No, not right off the top of my head. I don't.
Okay.
I mean, you got to get in there. You got to get to that pan because that's probably where it's, the drain pan under the A-coil.
Yep.
It's probably where it's accumulating.
And this is why we disclaim mold as home inspectors.
Well, and some of these A-coil, I don't know if you call it phlegm. I call it the box that surrounds the A-coil because I'm very layman. But some of them have fiberglass insulation in there, and then that's just going to trap dust and grow mold. So I don't like that either.
Wow. So there's no safe way to cool your home, really. You can get mold growing in an A-coil in your forced air furnace and a mini split, ductwork in your slab. I mean, anytime you're pumping cold air through, or you're cooling air, you're potentially causing condensation and you got dust, you can have mold growth. That's just the reality of it.
I think we all have to move to San Diego where you don't have to use any heating equipment or cooling equipment.
Yeah.
Dry climates. Yeah.
Yep.
go somewhere where it's 70 to 80 degrees
Yeah.
all year.
And dry.
Those
The Caribbean, yep.
hot climates, bad news. Really cold climates, bad news.
Yeah.
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 Sounds like you're going to be busy for a while, Vickie.
Mold is written about in the Bible, Leviticus chapter 14. And so after hearing so many classes, every mold class starts with that. I finally got out the Bible to read it. And it's really interesting because, well, some people say it's a metaphor for clean living. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure it's a health manual because Leviticus 13 will help you figure out if you had leprosy. And they literally called mold leprosy of homes.
Huh.
And so read it sometime. It's pretty interesting. So it's part of the food chain. It's the decomposer. That's one thing that makes the mold business pretty solid because it will never go away.
And with that, we're going to put a wrap on episode number 2 of Mold. Vickie, why don't you go ahead and tell us where you can be reached again?
Yep. Well, my phone number is 612-508-2742. My little website is mnmold.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much for another extended session with you to talk about mold. You can see we've completely solved all the problems, and you can happily live in your house in a clean environment and feel good every day that you're not going to have any.
And we're not trying to scare people. We don't want to scare people. I'm always trying to calm them down. So, but it's a very moldy state here.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Vickie. We appreciate you and your time. And Neil, thank you for jumping in and providing your expertise. You've been listening to Structure Talk, a Structure Tech presentation. My name is Bill Ulrich alongside Tessa Murray and Reuben Saltzman, literally today alongside Tessa Murray and Reuben Saltzman. And you've been listening to Structure Talk. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
For more information on how we can provide you with the right information about your home before you buy or sell, contact us at structuretech.com.